You check your phone more than you need to, not because you're waiting on something urgent, not because you're bored, but because some quiet, restless part of you needs to confirm that someone out there still remembers you exist, that you haven't, without realizing it, already been forgotten. You probably don't describe it that way to yourself. Most people don't. But if you sit with it honestly, there is a low hum of anxiety that lives just beneath the surface of your closest relationships, a background noise that never fully goes quiet, a feeling that no matter how good things are right now, no matter how present someone seems, they could, at any moment, without warning, without sufficient explanation, simply decide to go. And the most unsettling part of that fear isn't its intensity. It's how long it has been there, how familiar it feels, how it has quietly shaped decisions, relationships, and behaviors you thought were just personality. Here is what psychology has been uncovering for decades, and what most people will go their entire lives never knowing about themselves. That fear didn't begin with your most painful relationship. It didn't start with a betrayal you can name, or a moment you can trace on a timeline. For an enormous number of people, that fear was constructed so early, so gradually, so silently, that by the time they were old enough to reflect on it, it had already become indistinguishable from who they are. It felt less like a wound and more like a fact, less like something that happened to them and more like something they simply were. By the time this video ends, you are going to understand exactly how that fear was built, what it was responding to, and why the people who carry it are. And this is not comfort, this is psychology, often among the most emotionally intelligent, most perceptive, most deeply feeling people in any environment they enter. What has been treated as damage has another name entirely when you understand the mechanics behind it. Psychology does not classify fear of abandonment as a personality disorder. It classifies it as an attachment wound. And attachment wounds are not formed the way most people imagine. They are not forged in single catastrophic moments. They are assembled quietly over time through repeated ordinary experiences that teach a child's developing brain one specific and unforgettable lesson about what closeness means and what it costs. That lesson, once absorbed, does not remain in childhood. It migrates forward. It shows up in the way your chest tightens when someone takes too long to reply, in the way you rehearse conversations before they happen because you're not just preparing your words, you're bracing for a verdict, in the way you sometimes give more than you have, not from pure generosity, but from the unspoken terror that if you stop being useful, being easy, being available, the people you love will discover that you were never worth staying for in the first place. That is not irrationality. That is a survival system. And to understand where it came from, you have to go back to the environment that built it. Some children grew up in homes where love was not absent, but where it was inconsistent in ways no one ever acknowledged out loud. Not necessarily cold homes, not necessarily cruel ones, sometimes genuinely warm homes, homes with real affection and real care, where a parent's emotional availability arrived and disappeared on a schedule the child could not predict and could not control. One season, that parent was engaged, present, emotionally generous. Another season, they were withdrawn, distracted, orbiting their own unprocessed grief or stress or unresolved pain. The child observed all of this with the kind of total, unfiltered attention that only children are capable of. And the child, whose brain was still learning the fundamental rules of human relationship, drew the most logical conclusion available to a mind that young. The withdrawal is about me. The distance means something about my value. If I can just figure out what caused it, I can prevent it from happening again. That process, not once, not twice, but hundreds and thousands of times across years of development, is precisely where fear of abandonment is constructed. Not from being left in a single dramatic moment, but from the sustained, exhausting uncertainty of never fully knowing whether you were safe in the connection you depended on most. Psychology refers to this as an attachment environment,
and what it reliably produces in a child's nervous system has now been documented across decades of research. The brain begins to treat intimacy itself as a potential source of danger, not because closeness is not wanted, it is wanted with an almost unbearable intensity, but because in the child's direct experience, closeness was always accompanied by the possibility of sudden emotional withdrawal. And a brain that is wired for survival does not keep reaching towards experiences that have repeatedly resulted in pain without also building a detection system. It begins to scan. It begins to monitor. It develops a sensitivity to emotional signals that most people around it will never notice, because most people around it were never trained by their early environment to notice them. This is the child who knew before any adult in the room acknowledged it that something was wrong, who could feel the texture of silence, who understood the difference between a sigh of tiredness and a sigh of disappointment when both sounded identical to everyone else. These children were not fragile. They were not weak. They were running a level of emotional processing that required more cognitive resources than most adults consciously deploy. Their nervous system was doing exactly what nervous systems are designed to do. It was reading the environment with maximum precision and adapting in real time to maximize safety. Now carry that child forward. They're 32 years old. They're in a relationship with someone they deeply love. The evening is ordinary, comfortable, and then something small happens, a message that comes back shorter than usual, a moment where their partner laughs at something and the laugh sounds somehow far away, a silence that extends 2 seconds longer than it normally would, and in the space of a single breath, something moves through that adult that has no rational justification and no proportionate cause, something cold and wordless and deeply familiar. A quiet internal alarm that says something is shifting, the distance is starting, it is happening again. That response is not weakness, that's a surveillance system that was installed in childhood because early detection of emotional withdrawal once meant the difference between being able to repair a connection and being completely blindsided by its collapse. The sensitivity that reads as anxiety or insecurity in adulthood once was an instrument of extraordinary precision. The problem is that instrument is now being used in an environment that no longer requires it at that intensity. And because it was never recalibrated, it keeps generating alerts in situations that don't warrant them. It keeps reading ordinary human behavior, distraction, tiredness, introversion, a bad day, as evidence of the withdrawal it was always waiting for. If what you're hearing right now is resonating in a way that feels less like information and more like recognition, this channel exists specifically for moments like this one. Every week there is content here designed for the people who feel things deeply, who think about human behavior seriously, and who are ready to finally understand the invisible mechanics running beneath the surface of their own lives. If that is you, consider subscribing now, because what comes next in this video is the part most people never reach, and it changes everything. Because here is where it becomes complicated. Here is the part that the fear itself never wants examined too closely.
The same sensitivity that once protected the child begins, in adulthood, to reshape behavior in ways that feel instinctive, but are actually strategic responses to a threat the conscious mind has long since stopped tracking. Some people with this wound become extraordinary at anticipating what others need. They are the ones who notice when someone in the room is uncomfortable before that person has said a word, who adjust their tone, their energy, their presence to keep others at ease, who have been called empathetic, intuitive, easy to be around. And all of that is real, but underneath it, for many of them, runs a quieter motive that they rarely examine. Keeping others comfortable became, somewhere in childhood, the most reliable strategy available for preventing loss. If I can make sure you are never disappointed, never frustrated, never unhappy in my presence, then you will have no reason to leave. So they apologize first. even when they are not wrong. They make themselves smaller in conflict to preserve the relationship. They swallow needs, suppress wants, reroute anger into accommodation, because the part of them that is still a child in a confusing household knows, with a certainty that bypasses rational thought entirely, that being too much is a risk they cannot afford. Others respond in the opposite direction. They pull back before they can be pulled from. They create distance not out of indifference, but out of a pain management strategy so deeply internalized they don't even recognize it as a choice. These are the people who fall hard and fast, and then, when the relationship reaches the point of genuine depth and genuine vulnerability, find a reason to question everything, who love with full intensity and simultaneously keep one foot pointed toward the exit, who have been called emotionally unavailable by partners who could not understand how someone so warm could also be so withholding. The answer is not that they don't care. The answer is that they care so much, and the history of caring that much has ended so badly that the nervous system has decided, without consulting the conscious mind, that controlled distance is safer than total exposure. Both of these patterns, the overgiver and the emotional withholder, are variations of the same original intelligence, a mind that learned through direct and repeated early experience that love was not a stable thing, that the people you needed most could not be fully counted on, and that the safest response to that truth was to build a behavioral architecture designed to hold connection close while also hedging against its inevitable collapse. The architecture was sophisticated, genuinely sophisticated, built by a mind under pressure, running on incomplete information, doing the best possible work with the emotional tools available at the time. The problem is that architecture was designed by a child, with a child's understanding of relationships, a child's available options, and a child's definition of safety. It was never designed to run an adult life. It was never built for relationships between two autonomous people with equal power. It was built for survival in a specific environment, and that environment no longer exists, but the architecture keeps running because no one ever told it the context had changed. This is why the origin matters, not as an excuse, not as a permanent explanation for every difficult behavior, but because you cannot consciously update a system you don't know is operating. Most people spend years managing the surface symptoms, the jealousy, the over-explaining, the preemptive withdrawal, the compulsive reassurance seeking, without ever addressing the code beneath them. They change partners, they change cities, they read the books and attend the therapy and make the promises to themselves, and the pattern keeps returning because the root was never named clearly enough to be addressed directly. When you understand that your fear of abandonment was not born from personal weakness, but from a childhood environment that required a level of emotional intelligence and threat detection that most adults never develop, something fundamental shifts in how you relate to yourself. You stop treating your sensitivity as a liability to be managed and begin recognizing it as a capacity that was simply never given the right conditions to become something other than vigilance. You stop asking what is wrong with you and begin asking with genuine curiosity and without self-punishment, what happened to you? And that question, asked honestly without the need to protect anyone or minimize anything, opens something that the fear has always kept locked. The people who carry this fear are not broken, they are not too much, they are not fundamentally unlovable, though that is precisely the belief the wound keeps whispering. They are nervous systems that were calibrated to an environment that demanded more than any child should have had to give. Instruments tuned to a frequency that no longer serves the life they are living now. The recalibration is not fast. It is not a realization that arrives once and changes everything in an afternoon. It happens slowly, through repeated experiences of closeness that do not end in withdrawal, through relationships, therapeutic or personal, where safety is consistent enough and long enough that the nervous system finally begins to update its predictions, through the quiet,
patient, revolutionary act of letting someone stay and discovering with something close to disbelief that they actually do. That process begins with understanding, with seeing the fear not as evidence of your inadequacy, but as a record of your history, with recognizing that the child who built that system was not damaged. They were responding with everything they had to an environment that asked too much of them too soon. That child deserves something the fear never allowed. Not pity, not rescue, just the simple, overdue acknowledgement that what they did to survive was extraordinary, and that surviving it was only ever supposed to be the beginning. If this video reached something in you that you have been carrying quietly for a long time, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel because this is only one piece of a much larger map, and you deserve to know where the rest of it leads.